Hi, I'm Glenn Mattern, Director of Business Development with Play MPE here in Vancouver, British Columbia. Hope you're doing all well. And thanks very much for tuning in today to our Sync 101 interview and maybe education session, we might call that. So I guess the questions we want to answer are what is sync and what is music supervision? Or in other words, how do artists ultimately get their music into film, television, and video games? And we're going to find that out today, and we're extremely excited to bring some much sought after expertise directly to our music community. And we've got with us today Josh Briggs, who is the General Manager, West Coast, and Head of Publishing for Terrorbird Media and Terrorbird Publishing in Los Angeles, California. I think I've got that right, Josh?
That's it. You know, my
a
entire
lot of titles. That's great. And I should mention that Josh and his team represent over a dozen record labels, hundreds of independent artists for sync licensing. And as well, you guys look after worldwide publishing rights for over 150 songwriters. And you place music in everything from student films to blockbuster superhero movies. I guess, before we get too far, how did you get started,
doing this?
Yeah, into sync and I guess when did music really get to you in some sort of significant way?
Oh boy.
Let's go way back to,
We can go way back to when we got my sister a boombox for her 9th birthday, and I got to pick out the tape to go in it, and I picked the Beach Boys' Endless Summer and then wouldn't give it to her on her birthday because I wanted to keep it. But it's always been a journey, but I think it started by the time it really took hold in middle school, starting to play music and punk music and a lot of rock steady reggae was really kind of the first things that really grabbed me and felt very personal to me. And that was the kind of thing. And continued playing that music and being in, say, punk bands and being politically active and that kind of thing too throughout college. Great place to do that. But and through that got into college radio, got into and found my way into the music business there through an internship. So it's been a long journey. But music's always, I think most people, music's always been a part of my life, but there's certainly some of those things that are just those touchstones along the way. They're
sure.
Great.
Yeah. Listening to music in your brothers or sisters' rooms and those sorts of things, right?
Oh yeah,
or
absolutely.
Or stealing cassette tapes from children. That's nice. So
I'll continue to steal their cassette tapes.
And what got you into specifically, sync licensing and publishing? What took you there?
Sure. Yeah, it was also kind of a circuitous path because I don't think any child dreams of becoming a publishing company CEO or is out there collecting every folio of music that, Warner Chappell has ever published since 1909 or something. You are really you tend to come to the music business through that practical thing of being a fan. If you're going to work at a record label, it's because you like buying records. If you're going to play music or be in a band or be a manager or something, it's likely because you like going to shows, you like being part of that. There's always that fan point of entry. Publishing doesn't really have that. And I got there through the back door of internship, which is at Capitol Records, to kind of see how the other half worked. And from there, I worked there for a while in the A&R department, but then for about a year, and then got a job at ASCAP, so American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers, and in a job I didn't even know existed. I didn't know what they did, but I was in membership there. Department where we did a lot of artist showcases, we worked with a lot of artists, and we're able to kind of give you this great bird's eye view of the industry because you're, as a performing rights organization, you're basically Switzerland. You don't have a lot of competitors, and you pay people money. And you help explain this really obscure thing. And there's great early access to a lot of artists as they're kind of getting set up to try to get them to join ASCAP. But I met a lot of music publishers, managers, and that's where I met the Terrorbird folks. I met Jess Caroliano and Lauren Ross from Terrorbird. And we did a music supervisor showcase together while I was there, which was very much the style of the times for the artist Mira, who we still work with and publish to this day, and was when they turned the licensing side of things, when they added the publishing component, they were looking for someone to run the publishing company. And so that's where they called me asking for suggestions, and I suggested one person, and that was me. So that was the end of that. So yeah, it all just kind of came through those connections and being open to those different opportunities along the way. And then of course, the idea of sync licensing is so inherent in publishing, as we'll get to, that it was really a natural fit. And I've been there for over 8.5 years now. And so I started looking after the licensing department about 2 years ago. So but it's always been a huge part of obviously my day-to-day there.
I assume you're working from home now during the pandemic.
Oh yes.
And this isn't your corporate offices that you're in right now.
That's right.
Any placements that made you giddy? Any
Oh yeah.
There's got to be times where it's exciting.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It is. I mean, there are times when there are so many, right? Like there are the ones that end up as sort of part of the fabric of pop culture, and that's fun. Like we had an artist, Anna of the North, who has a song in the first film in the Netflix franchise, To All the Boys I've Loved Before, in what turned out to be a very pivotal scene in a movie that people really glommed onto, but which isn't something that's always clear when you're pitching music in the first place. And that was a song that was especially impactful because it was amazing to see the impact on her career and on the traction with that song specifically. And but I'll give you two other ones because I think that they also illustrate kind of how these things all weave together. The other one was American punk band, the Bouncing Souls, who were one of my favorite bands since I was 15 years old, who we started publishing maybe 4 years ago or something. Recently had a song in a medical procedural show called Chicago Med, and they were looking for songs for a character to sing to a mom to sing to a newborn baby. The idea was, as a young mother, she's a punk music fan, so those are the songs she knows. She doesn't know any lullabies, so to get this baby to sleep, she sings it a punk song. And so we pitched a bunch of our artists for that, and lo and behold, they picked a Bouncing Souls song, which she ends up singing the song "We Love Fun" to this old baby, and it was like a nice full circle moment for me as like part of my own musical journey. Or then things like another one that was an artist called Dark Minds, which is one of our writers, Dan Ellsworth, and a producer named C4. They do a lot of collaborative work together and just got us their song Ready, Let's Go in the Apple iPad Pro commercial. And that came out of a co-write session that we set up. So that was and that's like been a really fruitful relationship. It's been really amazing to see through. And so like, it's really cool to create music that then gives our team different things to pitch for new opportunities, as well as old things and things that also just come through to us from labels and artists we work with already. So yeah,
it's amazing when it comes full circle. Let's start from the beginning, as in, I guess ultimately, what is a license? Like, I understand there's two sides to complete a license: the sync and the master, correct?
That's right.
And what's the difference, and why do you need both of those things?
The difference is, well, the big thing is there are two rights. So there's really two copyrights. We're dealing with intellectual property when we're dealing with licensing. And this is usually the point where everyone's eyes should glaze over, because we're now officially in the weeds. We're talking about copyright law. Glenn, please. The big difference between those two licenses is that they each represent a different piece of intellectual property. The synchronization license, or the sync as we call it for short, represents the composition. That's the words and music that you are marrying with picture when you are licensing a song. So that Bouncing Souls example, a character in the show sang that song to another character on the show. The recording was the only musical accompaniment was that voice. So there was only a synchronization license in that example. if you have a master license, is the master recording. It's the actual recording of that composition, right? So, and you know, most syncs, you are licensing both rights. When there is a recording and there's an underlying composition, you need the permission of the owners of both of those pieces of intellectual property in order to successfully have a deal and put a song in, and put a song with picture. And so that's and so typically that master, the master rights are owned or controlled by a record label. And typically the rights in the composition or the synchronization side of it are owned or controlled by a music publisher. So companies like ours, we are a publisher, but we also do separately from that, carve out those rights of licensing for both record labels on the master side and for independent artists on the publishing or sync side, so that we can kind of fulfill needs for both those demographics.
Right. And are there different types of licenses?
There are different ones. Typically, you're talking about featured versus background uses, and instrumental versus vocal tend to be the difference. A featured use is what some people might call a needle drop. It's something where it might be literally like the party scene and the cops show up and a record scratches, the parents come home and the record scratch, and then it stops, right? That's an easy way to tell. Or the door to the car opens, the music gets louder. The door of the car closes, the music gets quieter. That would be considered a featured use. A background use or incidental use might be something that's more, that doesn't play as much into picture as a featured use. And that means the fee might be different for those two types of uses. One thing that affects a license fee, and definitely what you call the back end performance royalties you get paid from a PRO, in addition to whatever upfront money you get, change based on what type of use the license is.
Yeah, and are those fees very different? They can vary.
They can be drastically different. Yeah. And they're almost impossible to judge because they also vary so wildly based on many factors, which I'm happy to get into. But even episode to episode on the same show, or certainly show to show on the same network, can vary drastically depending on the type of use or even what their other music needs are.
And is there a difference between a licensing fee and a royalty? Like what's the difference, I guess?
Yeah, and so the license fee is paid up front, and then you consider the royalty basically a back end, so that if copyright law in a given territory allows for the payment and collection of a performance royalty, that's what you're going to get every time. In traditional media, anytime, say, if you have a song in a TV show, anytime that TV show is broadcast, you'll get a royalty. Or anytime someone streams it on Netflix, you'll get a royalty. But to look at it in terms of broadcast, what that means is, let's say you got $5,000 up front for the use of your song in a TV show. Yeah. And then it was broadcast on a major network in prime time. You'd get a royalty for that. And then let's say they reran it over the summer or now when there's no new programming, you'll get paid the same amount again if it's rerun during prime time. If then it gets into reruns or in syndication on other networks, you might get paid a lesser fee. And then if it goes to a streaming service, you'll be paid another separate royalty rate for that. That's on a per click basis rather than like a per broadcast basis. Yeah, so it gets very complicated, and it can be hard to find straight answers to like what what the value of that stuff is in terms of performance royalties. So it's oftentimes best to just consider that upfront fee, what you're going to see in terms of income from a given license, and let the rest kind of come in as free money down the line. If
an artist wrote the song and performed the song, do they get paid twice for that?
If they own everything, if you're your own publisher and you own your own masters, you're going to get paid both as the owner of the recording and as the owner of the song itself. You get paid the full fee.
If you're an independent artist, what should you do to make sure that you're ready to be licensed, I guess, as far as, you should register with a PRO, and maybe you can just kind of walk us through that a little bit, if you don't mind.
Oh yeah, sure. So the big thing is make sure you know who the rights holders are, right? Because we're still talking about copyright law. If you are in a band or a group that had multiple contributors to the making of the song, make sure everyone's on the same page with who actually wrote the song
Yeah.
and how basically how they're participating in income from it. But also make sure that if you have any, if you've sampled something that you have cleared it. You can get into samples if you want, but basically any additional songwriters or incorporating anyone else's work into your own makes them equal rights holders in at least in the eyes of as a clearance party is concerned, right? If Glenn, if you and I wrote a song together, but we also sampled like Prince, the Prince estate, even if it was one bar of a Prince song, the Prince estate as would now be considered a publisher of our work, right? He would be a writer, and we would, if he had any co-writers on that song we sampled, they would now also be writers and publishers of our new work. And the recording that we sampled would also now be part master owners, or would have to certainly clear any sync licenses that came up because we're using their intellectual property. So it's really clear, again, even if you're just in a band with 3 people, to talk through who wrote what percentages are what, before there's any money on the table. I think that's really important because it's important for us. If we're signing an agreement with you to represent your catalog, we need to know who the players are, so that we make sure when we're pitching music, that then if a music supervisor is interested in using the song, we're able to go to the necessary rights holders and get their permission before we sign off on anything else.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be hard for an independent artist to know if the fee is fair and all those sorts of things, right? Whereas,
for sure. And that gets to a point too, where companies like ours are happy to provide that guidance and to let you know what is fair and what is not, because we have a good idea of the landscape entirely, a good bird's eye view of just what those fees are, what's normal, what's atypical.
When's it a good time to sign off on market exclusivity, those sorts of things, right? I mean,
for sure. Yeah, there can be exclusivity for especially songs in commercials, and usually those are market specific. It might be, say, like alcoholic beverages or cars or electronics or go down the list, anything, and that's usually exclusive for the time that the commercial is airing. So if it's a 1-year license, you couldn't license your song to we couldn't license. We have Ilabamba song Mujeres. It was a Women's World Cup promo song. It would have certainly been exclusive to sports promos for the period in which it ran. But then after that, or during that time, we could pitch it for anything else. And if then after that period is over, we could pitch it for a WNBA spot or something else. So there's all kinds of there's flexibility even with that, but just to help you understand what you're signing away, it's helpful to have that guidance. But otherwise, making sure that metadata is clear, making sure you know who the owners are. If someone else has the rights and you do not, you're disclosing that. Having your lyrics, all those kinds of just really some basic information, even release date. We need to make sure songs aren't explicit. It's also helpful to have specific lyrics so that we can search them in case a theme is relevant to a search. For the creative side, super important. But again, that kind of who owns what is the number one thing.
Sounds good. And as artists or record labels, how can they make the job of music supervisors and sync representatives easier? For example, what are splits? These sorts of things. So.
Oh, sure. Yeah. That splits is a great one. Anytime you get into the jargon of any industry, right? You can watch this, it just double back on itself so quickly. The term sync is one of those. The term splits means something different in, say, film than it does in music. Yeah. And so we're here at the nexus of those two things. We're talking to you about splits. We mean writer-publisher percentage splits. We mean, and typically, if you are 50% the writer, you are 50% the publisher, unless you have a written deal to the contrary. Those two things always match. If you're the only songwriter, you're also the only publisher. If you have a publishing deal, that means you've already assigned those sync rights to a publisher. So like that's something you need to know. If the song is a cover song, right? If you covered like whatever, if you covered Lou Reed or Taylor Swift or Travis Scott or whatever, we need to know that you're telling us that, and that you're saying I only control the master because I covered this song. Because then all those original writers of those other songs have they have all the rights of as the publisher of that song.
It's important for an independent artist to have a publisher as well as a sync rep, do you think, or one or the other, or
Good question.
I guess what's the difference between a sync rep and a publisher ultimately?
Yeah, so a sync rep is you're basically carving out. So to go back to that example of like, if we wrote a song and we released it, we put it up on Spotify, you and I would each
50-50, right?
50-50 down the line.
Yeah.
We are both in that instance automatically in the eyes of the law. We are both the publishers of that work and we are both the master owners of that work. So until we assign the master rights to a record label or the sync rights to a publisher, we control all of those rights. So, but what a sync rep, sync agent, whatever you want to call us, does is carves out certain rights that you're allowed, right? We're not, say, a distributor or a record label. So we're not going to get your record in stores or market it or put it up on DSPs or any of those things. But if you want to carve out the rights for us to pitch, negotiate, and clear syncs for you, you can assign us that right. So our label clients do that instead of hiring a staff to do it for them. So where we work on commission, if we land them something, we get a piece of that master side income. So do you need, if you're an independent artist and you own your master rights and your publishing, sometimes a sync rep is the best place to start, because especially if your catalog, and I hate to say this, doesn't have inherent value. And what that means is if there isn't like money in the pipeline, if you're not already making, if you don't just need like help managing your business, which is something else really, it's also kind of the function of a publisher or a record label, right? Is to kind of level up your business. A sync agent can be really helpful because you can have them go seek out opportunities that will bring in income, right? Obviously a license fee brings in income, but there can be those ancillary streams of income that come from it too, right? If it does end up on a show that has fans who make playlists or there's official production playlists and it's generating Spotify streams or other interest in the song, that's income you need to make sure is managed. A sync agent is not going to manage that for you. A publisher and a record label would, but or if you need to break into other markets and those kinds of things, that's about broadening your team. But when you're starting out especially, or if you want to keep things independent, having a sync agent is more akin to just hiring someone to your own small business, right? You've got that addition to your team who's going to help do this one specific function of go hustle for sync income. There are many clients on our roster who we represent both their masters and the sync side, or we publish them and we rep their masters. That's something that's called a one-stop, because that's a term that's relevant to music supervisors. If you're a music supervisor on, say, Insecure on HBO, you want to use a song that's in the Terrorbird catalog, you only have to come to Terrorbird to clear it. There could be 5 writers and 2 master owners on the song you want to use, but your one stop is to Terrorbird. It's our job to go clear it with our master owners and writers. And artists, right? They'll grant permission to the song. We'll handle splitting up payments and everything else. And we're able to negotiate and clear as a one-stop. And where can that be helpful? It's helpful because sometimes because of budget or time constraints, music supervisors are only looking for one-stops because they don't want to go negotiate with a bunch of rights holders separately. That could be because like I've got to present to my client at 3:00 today. I can't have someone coming out of the woodwork who wants twice as much money. Or it's like I've only got $500 for my independent film, so don't throw. No one's going to want $50 for this thing. So like only send me stuff that's easy to clear. The important thing is to keep those rights exclusive. So even if you have, say, a publisher and then Terrorbird is repping your masters, you have someone, it's clear who's doing so exclusively. Like your publisher's just representing the sync side, Terrorbird's just representing the master side. There's never confusion on who gets what or anything like that. So that's important.
Things like instrumental versions of your songs important, or piano versions. That's a double thumbs up with the
double thumbs up. Well, the piano version thing, that's interesting. Instrumentals for sure. Cleans if you have really explicit songs. Though sometimes we want those explicit versions too. There are plenty of shows or films that they want that for creative reasons. They're not going to shy away from a few bad words, but to give you, I think of them as basically like arrows in our quiver, right? If you give us a 10-song record, if we have 10 instrumentals, all of a sudden we have 20 songs to pitch. If 2 of those songs don't have clean lyrics, if we have clean versions or can make them, even if they're just muted, we have a way of pitching now 2 more songs for more things. All of a sudden we went from 10 songs to 22 songs. And because creative needs can change so rapidly, the more you have that in advance, the better we can kind of just hit the ground running. And like I said, lyrics for lyric specific searches, or so we can make sure the content is okay for the program if they ask.
What kind of music files? MP3s, waves?
We like a high res audio, so either a wave or an AIFF. The only difference is AIFF was just a proprietary Apple thing at one point that they do. It's the same audio quality as a wave. It just retains metadata. So if you put any kind of metadata in the file itself, and AIFF is best, it will retain it. If you sent me a wave and I download it, even if you put all the metadata in your iTunes, it will disappear when I download it to my machine. So most music supervisors, they just want high-res audio, and they want to make sure that they know how to contact the person who pitched it. So even if you're pitching someone directly for some reason or sharing music with your team, that's why I recommend an AIFF. The audio is high enough quality that's ready for picture, and it can retain that metadata. If you send us waves, we'll convert them.
Should artists break down their music into like mood and genre categories when they're pitching them themselves? Like, should they, have an angry or pop, metal, rap?
It's good to know what you are, right? It's good. Music supervisors generally want to put you in a box. You might not want to, but when you're talking about sync licensing as a marketing effort, it's a lot easier to know where to go back to it if you've put yourself in a box, right? And so you can do that one of the few ways. The big thing here is to try to be as honest as you can. Don't just say you sound like Post Malone because Post Malone's popular. Yeah. If you don't, that's not a good look, because they'll listen to it and be like, nope, that's not right. And they'll just move on to the next thing, right? And they might just forget you entirely. But if you say, if you are accurate in your, say, descriptions, or I sound like these artists, or I make music that is this specific genre and hits these maybe moods or themes or anything else, whether you're pitching a music supervisor directly or you're sharing that music with your rep, it's going to help ingrain it in any of our brains sooner, the more accurate information you're giving us, right? So if you're, whatever your kind of references are for moods or themes, just do your best. It helps give us a little foothold, but we'll ultimately listen to it and make our own kind of judgments and decisions. So
clearly relationships are key, right? You don't want, we like to think it's all about the music, but relationships are really important as well, I would assume.
For sure. And someone like us, even though we're an independent company, we have, we have a team of 7 people who's listening to and digesting and pitching this music. And like, that's not me mostly on the day-to-day. That's, that's my amazing team. And so everyone's going to digest and process this music differently. But like, the more you can give us to work with when we are like in that phase of like getting it on board, the better, because that's how we'll remember it too. All right. Because we're hoping to remember it not just that day, but months or years later when the right searches are coming down and there's other new stuff coming in and whatever else. And we're still trying to always find the best song for the right scene. So.
Yeah. And should an artist write songs specifically for licensing or just pitch existing songs? I mean, that's probably an obvious question, but.
No, some companies will tell you I think some traffic more in the custom music space, like their production music houses who specifically, like if you write instrumental music, it can be tough for a licensing agent to pitch your music unless it's particularly unique. I'll get back to kind of unique stuff in a second, but like the big thing is most of our licensing clients are artists who release records. They are so like, even if we have them write something for a particular pitch at any point, they have records we're going back to. They have careers that they're supporting. They're touring, or they're just making music online and they're living that existence. But like, they're putting in a lot of work, developing that profile. And music supervisors, our relationships are dependent on that like music supervisors are coming to us and saying, you guys work with cool, new, up and coming artists in a variety of genres. So if we send them something like, yeah, here's this new cool thing, that they know that it's authentic. They want authenticity because they're world building. They're doing all these like they're trying to create the most accurate and interesting visual story they can. And audio is a huge part of it. And so like, you want it to be real. I also think it gives songs value over a longer period of time if you're able to be authentic in the music that you're pitching, because then you're not just chasing down a trend, you are doing your own thing. We always tell artists, especially as independents, you're either you're already ahead of the curve or you're on your own path, right? So like, you don't want to be the person who's like all of a sudden pivoting and trying to sound like what's popular if that's not what you do naturally. Eventually, the syncs will come eventually. It's just a matter of like having the patience and like the team ready to be like pounce on them when they do.
For sure. It's authenticity always wins, right? One would hope in music particularly, or any sort of art form. I guess anything I'm missing, any other final tips or notes or messages for artists looking to get their music licensed for film and television?
Watch stuff and listen to things, right? Like you'd mentioned sort of piano versions of your own songs. I think it's important to make your music flexible, to have access to, say, stems. So that way, if there is piano in the song, you can strip out all the percussion and all of a sudden you have a piano version. If someone says like, ooh, we'd love a stripped down version that then maybe has build towards the end. Now we can create that together, right? So be flexible, produce your music with that idea of flexibility in mind. But as you're watching and consuming media, especially while, everyone's sitting at home, right? The best songwriters and producers in the world are all trapped at home. So that means everybody's kind of in the lab right now, and everyone's going to be trying to like do more new and interesting things. So like but like you'll hear a pattern with the music that's being used. There's stuff that sits in the background, as we talked about, and those are background things. Those don't make as much money as the featured hooky things. And what's a hooky thing? It's just anything with something you can latch onto, right? It could be a cool beat or like interesting, percussive production element. It could be a lyrical hook, like we think of traditionally, like just a strong chorus that is just undeniable. It could be something that sounds like Billie Eilish, which is just like, a thing right now. It could be whatever. It could be garage rock that just has like a perfect grungy tone to it. It could be in a different language, right? Whatever your hook might be, lean into it, make it sound as professional as possible. It's worth an investment to get your music, mixed and mastered professionally, if that's not a strength of yours for making it yourself. And, but, do your best to make the best. It's always a challenge, right? You're trying to make the best music you can with the tools that you have. But like, if you're looking for kind of where to spend your money as an independent artist, definitely like professional mixing, get something mastered, like have that stuff like ready to go and speak from an authentic place. That's always what's gonna win the day and give us the best chance at like pitching and landing your music somewhere that has value.
Another question that often comes up is what's the best way for an artist or label for that matter to present themselves to music supervisors? Do you have any advice on that?
For sure. I, of course, like biased that we should use a company like Terrorbird or something, but that's it. But even that, you still have to submit and be seen by us. Right? There's no matter what you're dealing with gatekeepers. So I mentioned sort of honesty in your own like descriptions of your own music. That's huge. I think the biggest thing is making sure you're following whoever it is you're submitting to, whether that is a sync rep or if you are trying to pitch your music directly to music supervisors, that the first thing you're doing is asking the question, what's appropriate for you? How would you like to receive this information? Right? We use our own website so that we can keep things streamlined and go through everything, especially because we have a lot of departments that do other music marketing stuff. And but like, say if you're reaching out to a music supervisor who happens to work on a show you just think your music would be perfect for, is asking them, do you accept unsolicited submissions? Can I send you some music? If so, how do you prefer to receive that music? You know, because some of them will only want a streaming link. Some will want a Dropbox or Disco or some other kind of thing where they can download the music themselves or whatever it might be. The point is they're going to have their own, everyone has their own preferences. Even we try to account for all of them where we can, but
I may have some bias on that as well, but yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. You're certainly there's, and it can differ from medium to medium and certainly person to person. So like, just be ready to be flexible, email people directly and know why you're emailing them. I think that's also important is if it was a music supervisor, you saw their work and you appreciated it, let them know what it was. What was the song? What was the show? What was the thing that made you go, I'm hitting them up? Same thing if you're hitting up Terrorbird and you're like, you might say like, oh, I love these artists on your roster. I think my music would be a great fit alongside them. That might be great. You might also look at a roster and say like, I don't think you have enough of fill in the blank. You might need more of my music. That shows you did your research. It doesn't, because all of us sync licensing agents, we need as much variety of music as there are stories to tell. So we'll manage your expectations accordingly in terms of like what's out there for the kind of music that you make. But it's that level of attention to detail is appreciated. It's just a professional courtesy. So that's the number one. And make sure you include contact information in whatever it is that you're ultimately sending. So if they like what they've heard, they know how to get in touch with you.
Well, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to do the interview today, Josh. We appreciate that, and we appreciate Terrorbird and all you guys do. That's fantastic. Hope you're not sweating too much down in LA. A little hot in there.
You're doing all right, you know. Thank you, Glenn.
Yeah. Well, make sure to follow Play MPE and hashtag Play MPE book on all our socials. And stay looped in on future online events and news. And of course, follow Terrorbird Media on all their social channels. And again, thanks, Josh. And thanks everyone for tuning in today. Appreciate that.
Thanks. Bye.